Good evening, everybody. I said good evening, everybody. Just checking there's actually somebody out there. You see, I can't really see anything beyond the end of the stage because someone over there is shining bright lights at me. You don't want to, it could be a completely empty hall and I don't want to waste my pearls, do I? Anyway, I hope you're enjoying our little show. Yes. Some people have suggested that I'm Birmingham's answer to Ronnie Corbett. But I would take issue with this. For one thing, I'm a full 6.5 inches taller than the diminutive Mr. Corbett. And for another thing, I don't laugh at my own jokes like he does. This is for two reasons. Firstly, I consider it to be unprofessional. And secondly, to be honest with you, my jokes aren't really very funny. Now, a young doctor friend, you wouldn't believe this, but a young doctor friend of mine had never heard of Ronnie Corbett. Remarkable, isn't it? That only about 30 years after his heyday, the great comedian is already receding from the public consciousness. Mind you, I think I'll be lucky to last 30 minutes in the public consciousness after this. Now then, those of you that know me well will immediately appreciate that the Birmingham accent that I'm using tonight is in fact completely false. Now I hope that if there's anybody in the West Midlands, from the West Midlands here tonight, they won't take too much offence. The thing is, I couldn't possibly do something like this in my own voice. And the accent that I can sustain most reliably and easily is a Birmingham accent. A second and extremely important reason is that in my experience, the juxtapositioning of complex language and syntax with the rather lugubrious Birmingham accent makes for very considerable comedic impact. I'm glad you agree with me. That'll make things a lot easier later on. Now, the other thing about the Birmingham accent, I mean, it's practically impossible to take anybody seriously who's got this accent, isn't it? I mean, imagine Sir Winston Churchill if he'd had this accent. He'd never have had the same command of the nation, would he? Never in the field of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so few. Doesn't quite have the same ring to it, does it? But I digress. Although I've never lived in Birmingham, I've spent quite a bit of time there. This is mainly because my sister was at university there. In her first year, she studied law, but she quickly changed to English and history. Just as well, really, because I would probably have disowned her if she'd become a solicitor. Now, I've had many... she went on, though. She was a very good student. She went on to study for a Master of Philosophy and a PhD, both on the subject of medieval lay didactic literature. I actually read the PhD once, and it was very long. In some places it was mildly interesting, but to be honest with you, it was never going to make it onto the bestseller list. Now, I've had many wonderful experiences in Birmingham. For example, I once ate unfeasibly large naan breads in a curry house in Edgbaston. On another occasion, I visited the scale model of the Elan Valley reservoirs in Cannon Hill Park. It's quite good, but probably not worth a special visit. And then there was the famous occasion when I melted my trousers whilst ironing them before an important meeting and had to borrow my brother-in-law's, which were considerably and embarrassingly too big. However, the greatest occasion, my greatest memory of Birmingham, is undoubtedly my sister's wedding. This took place in the imposing setting of Highbury Hall in Edgbaston. My sister looks magnificent in a medieval-style wedding dress in green, And in keeping with the unconventional style of the occasion, the best man was a woman. My brother-in-law's sister, Harriet, or Harry, as she liked to call herself. Anyway, there was my sister in her wonderful dress, and 4 of us dressed up all posh in top hat and tails. There was myself in my role as usher, my brother-in-law Simon, the groom, my father as the father of the bride, and Harry. And those of you that be familiar with weddings will know that before you can sit down to all that posh grub, there's the interminable process of taking all those official wedding photographs. And there's a particular protocol to this. One of the required images is of the bride and, shall we say, the 4 principal men. Though of course one of them was in fact a woman, but there we are. So after the photographer had taken a couple of more static shots, he asked the 4 men to take off their hats and cast them into the air in a coordinated fashion. Now, of course, gravity being what it is, when the hats had reached the top of their trajectory, they descended with considerable velocity. Unfortunately, one of said projectiles was interrupted in its descent by my sister's head. Fortunately, the bride did not sustain any serious injury, but there was much ensuing debate about who had cast the offending projectile. My brother-in-law solved this mystery a few weeks later, as he was keen to absolve himself of this most heinous misdemeanour. This he did with the aid of the official wedding video and a slow-motion playback facility. With the assiduousness of a United Nations weapons inspector, he carefully followed the flight path of each of the hats and was able to establish beyond any doubt that it was in fact my good self who was responsible for this minor catastrophe. Now, of course, I blame the photographer, whose health and safety practices were sorely lacking. Where, for example, was the risk assessment for this activity? Where was the training course? And where were the safety helmets to protect all those at risk from descending items of millinery? Surely, life is dangerous enough without having to run the risk of salvos of top hats on your wedding day.